And welcome back to another episode of Primility Primer, our morning reminder of the power of balancing pride and humility as we go about our daily lives. This is episode number 74. I am your host, Jared Morris. You know, sometimes you look up a definition of a word and it's way stronger or more severe than you think it's going to be. That happened to me just a minute ago. I was looking up the definition of the word fiasco. I'll tell you why in a minute. But here's the definition of fiasco: a thing that is a complete failure, especially in a ludicrous or humiliating way. Well, based on that definition, I definitely was involved in a fiasco yesterday. I was scheduled to host a webinar, and it could not have gone worse. I mean, I guess it could have gone worse, but it was pretty bad. From the moment the webinar started, there were audio issues. Nothing that we tried to fix it really made a difference. And it wasn't like we got 20 minutes in and were able to deliver some value and then the audio issues happened. It was literally almost from the moment we said go, there were awful issues, and we tried restarting it. We tried doing a few things. Nothing worked. And eventually we just had to cancel and reschedule this webinar. And this wasn't a webinar where there were like 15 people registered. There were 4,718 people registered for the webinar, I think. And I think I may have post-traumatic webinar fiasco syndrome right now, because I'm deathly terrified that you can't hear what I'm saying. So hopefully there's no chat box here, which I guess, based on some of the reactions that we got yesterday, could be a good thing, could be a bad thing. But it was not a great experience, but it was a learning experience. And I always hope that when events like that happen, I can at least take some lessons away from them. Certainly you want to take some specific lessons away so that you can change things that you did, things that you didn't do, to make sure it doesn't happen again. And certainly we're going to do that for the rescheduled webinar on Tuesday, because you got to learn from these moments or they'll happen again. And certainly we don't want that. So, you know, there's a couple of thoughts I had about it that I wanted to share on today's episode of Primility Primer. And what's funny is someone who was there on the webinar, actually emailed me and, you know, had some encouraging words about how it happens to everybody. And, you know, these things happen and they do. And he said, you know, it might be a good topic for Primility, and had some kind words about the show. And so I very much appreciate that. And you're right. And that's kind of one of the reasons why I wanted to talk about it on here today. But I actually want to go back to before the webinar, because there was something interesting that happened before that. I was actually, because of a scheduling conflict at the last minute, I was going to have to host this webinar by myself. And I happen to work with some incredible people. One of those people is Garrett. If maybe some of you who are listening know him, maybe some of you don't. But he stepped up and offered at the last minute to help me to co-produce the webinar with me instead of me having to go it alone. And that was, to me, an ultimate act of primility, because number one, not only did Chris have pride in his own experience, his knowledge, what he had to share with an audience about this topic, without even any preparation, barely just knowing what slides I had put together. He was willing to stand up and say, hey, I still have something of value to offer, but also the humility to see one of his colleagues in a place where he could use a little bit of help, and put his busy schedule aside, put whatever he had planned for the day aside. Surely that, you know, had to throw his day kind of up in, you know, into a bit of disarray to do that at the last minute and invest a couple of hours in that. That's a great act of primility. And so I appreciate Chris for doing that, and learned something just from that. But then the webinar started. And again, despite our best efforts, we weren't able to get anything going. And there was a mixed reaction. Now, this was a free webinar, I should say. And there was a mixed reaction. There were a lot of people who, you know, who understood, who have done it before and experienced, you know, technology issues that you don't foresee and that you can't plan for, and just know that stuff happens. And there are other people who were not so nice about it and got very frustrated and had nasty comments in the chat and to support and all of that. And, you know, I suppose there's a couple different ways to look at that. I think it's unnecessary. I don't think that I would have nasty comments for someone who is going through that, because I think doing what I do, I'd be able to empathize a little bit. But I also don't think it's good to just totally dismiss those comments. It is easy to say, oh, this is free. Whatever, people shouldn't get that frustrated about it, whatever. But it's, there is a time investment there. People, even though it's a free webinar, people are scheduling their days around watching this, and they're expecting it's still an exchange of value, because people are exchanging their time and their attention for information. And naturally, part of why we're doing the webinar is to market the Rainmaker platform. We're going to announce a new project in there. And so even though they're not paying money, they are giving us something of value in return for what we were supposed to deliver them. And they held up their end of the bargain by being there, and we didn't. And to me, that is where I really felt a responsibility to take responsibility, to be accountable for this event. Because we didn't have any control per se over the technology issues that happened, but that's the program that we're using. We're responsible for putting the webinar on in a way that people can watch it and learn from it, and we didn't. And I had a recent experience with a contractor who's doing some work on our house, who, there were some issues with what a subcontractor did, and he basically tried to pass it off to the subcontractors, being the subcontractor's, fault or issue. And it's like, well, okay, but you're responsible for that. Like, that's what we're, paying you to do. And so I don't think, if you have made a promise to somebody, and in essence, that's what we had done with the webinar, then I don't think it's bad to feel a sense of responsibility for saying, hey, it wasn't necessarily in our control in that moment, but it was our responsibility. And while you can't go back and change what happened, you certainly can change what you do in the future. And I think, there's a certain sense of pride that will drive that feeling, really believing that you have this responsibility to deliver the good experience that you promised, and having the humility to understand that every single person who's in that audience is going to have their own emotional reaction. None of those reactions are wrong. You take all of them, you kind of take it all in as feedback and learn from it and move on to the next time. And I think in those moments, it was, I could start to feel that, wanting to not lash back out, but, you want to react, or you want to say something about the negative reactions, and having my wristband, being able to look at it and remember, the humility in the face of human emotion is always important, because none of us can control human emotion. We can only control our reaction to the human emotion. And so my choice in that case, anyway, and I don't know if this is right, this is just kind of how I chose to handle it, or I'm choosing to handle it, let those emotions happen, take it all in, and now let's move forward. And we've got a great team that was already thinking about that, from the moment the webinar happened, about what can we do next, what different providers can we use, or what change can we make, what process change can we make. And seeing that was another great lesson. I work with a lot of really solution-oriented people that, rather than dwelling on it, we all had a quick little 3 or 4 minute phone chat to just kind of get it all out of our system. And then it's like, hey, let's move forward. This happened. It is what it is. But you know what? We've got important lessons to teach. We've got important things to do. Let's take pride in that. And let's just realize, hey, sometimes this stuff is going to happen. Let's get a little bit better process for it. Let's try something else, and let's move forward with it. And I think when a fiasco happens, I don't know that there's a much different way to do it. I think the only other thing to add would be, I think offering a heartfelt apology when something like that happens, I think can go a long way. I don't think, I guess there's a few different ways you could handle it there. You could just kind of ignore it. Especially for something like this, where again, people weren't paying for it. I suppose you could get away without really addressing it. But not only do we want to get it rescheduled as soon as possible, I just felt that it would be a good idea to say, hey, we know you're disappointed. We're disappointed. Yes, this can happen to anybody, but it happened on our watch, and we take responsibility for that. We promised you a webinar. We didn't deliver, and now we're going to make it up to you, and we're going to make it up to you soon. And that, I think, a sincere, a specific apology, I think, always goes a long way towards helping to assuage some of those hard feelings that may be there. And if it doesn't, maybe you lose some people that are in your audience, or maybe you lose some people, whatever. Maybe those, maybe if if you're willing to really step up, be accountable, move on to the next step, and people aren't willing to support you in that, maybe they're not the right people for you to move forward with, whether it's in friendships, relationships, business, whatever it is. And that is one thing about these opportunities. They do give you a chance to see that. So anyway, I apologize if that explanation was a little bit rambly. I know there were probably 3, 4, 5 different lessons in there, I guess, but it's all still pretty fresh in my mind. One of those experiences that you wish didn't happen, but when it does, you really hope that you can learn something from it. I do feel like I learned something from it. And so I look forward to putting those lessons into practice and using them, number one, to help prevent such situations in the future, and number two, to be able to respond even better to them when they inevitably do occur in the future. And now I just hope that you all were able to hear this and that it recorded, because technology, man. So anyway, thank you all very much for being here, for being with me for this week of Primility Primer episodes here as we close down another week. You can go to primility.com/join to get on the email list. Not only will you get the Friday email digest later this morning and every Friday, but you'll also get the Monday morning email, a short, quick, positive thought to kick your week off on the right note. I really love writing those, and I hope that you all enjoy reading them as well. So go to primility.com/join, get on the list, and we will be back Monday morning with another brand new episode of Primility Primer. Until then, over the weekend, stay cognizant of your pride and your humility, and we will talk on Monday. Respond.